Okay, we got a couple more people who are online. So John, we're going to get started.
Great, let's go.
Great. So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Dan Keelan. I am the founder and managing partner of Lightning Strike Media. Lightning Strike Media works with growing companies on their branding, marketing, learning, and support systems. And today we're happy to be working with Performix Group to bring you this webinar. I'm especially happy to be introducing you to John Ninkovich. John is the CEO of the Performix Group. John works with the leaders, the CEOs, the founders of growing companies, working in the areas that really help them do what we're talking about today, which is overcome the barriers they encounter as they grow. John's focus is on core ideology development, planning and execution, leadership and culture, go-to-market planning, performance alignment, and he has an active advisory and coaching practice. So today, John's going to kind of walk you through how he works with his clients who, as they're growing and trying to execute well, hit barriers that kind of stop them in their tracks, and for a high percentage of companies, really become a stopping point. And so overcoming those barriers are critical to continuing your mission. So, John, it's my privilege to introduce you to the group. Welcome.
Great, thanks, Dan. I appreciate the your time in preparing to do this and your introduction, and excited to be with everybody today and spend a little time over the next 45 minutes to an hour to help hopefully educate everybody on what you're going to run into running your business, and how do you actually when do you run into those barriers, what does it look like, and how do you overcome them. So great, let's jump in, Dan. So a little bit about me. I'm a certified EM advisor. Our work, as Dan talked about, is really working with organizations that are growing organizations, and they need help with how do I get to the next level? What does that look like? So I work with a set of tools and help organizations working at the ownership level, at the CEO level, the leadership level, helping those organizations figure that out. I tend to work with companies from startup, and I have some of those that are really incubating companies right now, to some pretty large organizations that are $250 to $300 million in revenue. And our real focus, our organizational mission is really focused on helping organizations improve their performance. My personal experiences, I've very entrepreneurial, grew up in family-owned businesses, and have run companies in training, consulting, technology, healthcare, and staffing spaces over the last 25 to 30 years. So I have a pretty broad background that hopefully brings some value to the work that I do. So it's a little bit about me. So our agenda today, again, is we're going to spend 45 minutes on discussing the barriers to growth, and then 15 minutes of Q&A. We'll save the question and answer till the end of the session. And really, my goal for this session is to hopefully give you some tricks and some things that you can implement maybe this afternoon or tomorrow to help you with continuing to grow your organization. So that's our agenda for today. So our goals are this: it's to create an awareness and an understanding of the barriers to growth. The things that you're going to run into running a business. What do they look like, and why do they show up, and where do they show up? Then help you understand what actions can you undertake to get around those barriers or to move over them. So if you continue to grow really quickly, you need to figure out what that looks like. But if you've maybe grown and then you're stuck, you've hit a plateau, what do you need to do to navigate around those barriers in order to continue growth? And then the last thing is really, what should the CEO or ownership and a leadership team, what do they really spend their time on? And that gets, that question it's a different question when you start up a company through the early stage growth. And as you continue to evolve your company, it's important to really think about that and what does that look like. So we'll spend a little bit of time working on that. And, the one thing I can tell you is that, we go to the next slide, it's great, is that the barriers to growth, they're consistent. And, I get a chance to go talk about this stuff quite a bit both working directly with clients, but also going and doing a little bit of speaking. And, one of the things that I run into is that people say, well, my business is different. And the reality is everybody's business is going to go through this stuff. It doesn't really matter what industry that you're in. You're going to run into these barriers to growth. They just happen in every industry. And, the thing that's important is understanding that it's not a matter of if they're going to occur, not a matter of if you're going to hit these barriers, but when you're going to hit those barriers, and what are the things you need to do to navigate around those things. And, the one thing that we know is that headcount, which is the number of people that are working full-time in your business, if you tell me or the rest of the EM advisors what your headcount is, it gives us an idea of where you're stuck and what barriers that you've run into. It's that important. So this slide is a slide that I present quite a bit. It's a really interesting slide, and there's a lot on there. And when I talk through this slide, the data that's really fascinating is, and this data comes from irs.gov, so you can go and take a look at this data. But the numbers are interesting. There's about 30 million companies in the United States that file a tax return. And of those 30 million that file a tax return, 96% of those companies have fewer than 10 employees and less than $1 million in annual revenue, which is crazy. So that means if you're lucky enough to be in the 4% of organizations that have achieved 10 full-time employees and reached $1 million in sales, you're really in rarefied air. Most organizations are just not performing at that level. And it actually talks a lot about what's really the driver of the American economy is it's small business. Those small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. And I don't know if most people realize that. Really what this slide is about is it shows you there's about 1 million companies that get to that first barrier of 10 full-time equivalents and $1 million in revenue. There's about 140,000 companies that get to 50 to 75 FTEs and about $10 million in revenue, 30,000 that get to the 200 to 400 FTEs and $50 million in revenue, and about 2,500 to get past the $500 million mark, and 1,000 FTEs. And that 2,500 is really the Fortune 2000. It's the Fortune 500 companies. It's those big companies that we are so familiar with. And the interesting thing that we see is that the things that affect your ability to grow your business, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, revenue is a leading indicator, but it's really actually the more people you have in your business. So headcount is really a tremendous predictor of when you're going to run into a barrier. And just the reality of it is the more people you have working in your business, the more difficult it is to get everybody rolling in the same direction, the more difficult it is to execute the things that were easier when you were a smaller business. And one of the things that's really, I think, most important about this slide is the things that get you to one level of performance as an organization aren't the same things that get you to the next level of performance. And so really what that means is the things that you do at startup to help you get over that $1 million mark and the 10 FTE barrier, that's great, all the startup activities, and you grow your business. But the things that you need to do to get over that second barrier, they're different. And Marshall Goldsmith's the guy that wrote this book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And I really think that's what this slide really talks to, is that as leaders, as business owners, as CEOs, as partners, or even as somebody who's running a function in a business, if you want to grow your function, you want to grow your business, you need to operate differently. You need to lead differently. You need to think about what that looks like. And so we'll spend some time really talking about in the next slides, what are those things that you need to really think about in order to grow your business, because it's never more of the same. It's continued to evolve. It's also important to continue to challenge yourself. And when it's interesting is, I go work with a lot of business owners, and a lot of them are very successful. And when I talk to them about the things that they have to do or they need to do in order to continue to grow their business, and hopefully they're concerned about growing, because if you're not, you're going backwards probably. But what that means is that if they want to continue to grow their business, they're going to have to challenge themselves to operate differently. That's really hard for entrepreneurs, and I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family, and when I have these conversations with my dad, he said that's not the way we do things. And I'll be honest with you, he hit the second barrier, but didn't grow past it because he wasn't willing to evolve his personal skill set build the right kind of leadership team to continue to evolve his business. So that's an important part of it, is the realization that I need to challenge myself in order to continue to grow myself, my leadership team, my management team, and my organization to the next level. So let's talk about the barriers to growth. So there's three barriers that we see that are consistent in organizations that we work with. And again, these replicate themselves in all businesses. And the first one is infrastructure. And when we talk about infrastructure, we're talking about things like technology, office space, warehousing, machinery. Another way to think about it is kind of tools and processes. It's kind of all the stuff that you need in order to operate your business. And, you know, one of the things that we have here is an example of technology is a barrier within the infrastructure barrier itself. And, you know, what we see is that as you continue to grow a business, the things that you do at startups, so you can start a business. And a lot of the companies that I work with, it could be a staffing company, it could be an architectural firm, it could be a variety of different healthcare company, all different things, companies that I work with. Really, barriers to entry aren't that significant. You can hatch a business, you know, out of your home office or in a small office somewhere, and you can really start to make some gains in your business with just doing basic office systems. So you could be using QuickBooks and Microsoft Office and Excel spreadsheets, and you can actually start to make some more progress in your business. But as you start to add people into the organization, and as you start to add more complexity into the business, you have to start to look at how do we start to integrate and start to run our business through more sophisticated kind of systems. So we look at things like a Microsoft Dynamics or Salesforce, if we're going to use some form of CRM or more elaborate accounting systems. And so we start to think about how do we start to build our business and get our business to the next level using technology as a foundation of that. And the interesting thing about that is that that's a big change. So one of the things that I see consistently in organizations that I work with that are stuck between the first and second barrier, and also actually getting to the third barrier, is that they have a lot of manual process that continues in their business. And they haven't really leveraged their technology effectively. And so they have a lot of stuff that continues to happen through email and spreadsheets. And they're not really leveraging their technology investments that they've made in their business. And one of the key things that I see for that, one of the key reasons I think this occurs, is that there's nobody really truly owns making sure that that technology is enabled across the entire enterprise. So I may have a leader in one function that, you know, that's implementing something, but as we look at, you know, moving from first barrier to second barrier and really getting functional, fully integrated systems, there's nobody that really owns that. And, you know, in my conversations with business leaders, I oftentimes hear them talk about that they're not sure they're seeing a return on investment from their technology investments, as an example. And I would tell you that the big reason for that is they haven't really thought about how to truly integrate every fabric of their business within that technology infrastructure. And there's nobody that owns that. And so you find these technology implementations that are 50% implemented, and there's no real operational efficiency that gets driven in the business. And so, you know, one of the things that's also important to think about on the second barrier there, as you see, we talk about introduction of standard operating procedures. And I got to tell you that I think that's a super important part of any business. And I think the earlier you can get at thinking about standard operating procedures, the faster you can grow your business. And kind of thinking behind that is, the better I get at creating franchisable business models within my operation, the faster I can grow. And really what that means is that if you go to buy a franchise, and I've been lucky enough to be a part of a couple of those, what they vet you on is your business acumen, and do you have the finances in order to buy a franchise from them. And what happens after that is they give you everything else. So they tell you exactly where you're going to put a store. They tell you how much traffic you need to have coming by. They tell you what products to buy, where you're going to buy them. They put your brand in place. They do all those kind of things. What your staffing numbers need to look like, what your cost of sales should be, all that stuff. And so the beauty of that is you just go in and execute. Well, and all the clients that I work with, they're not franchises. They're small and mid-sized companies that they're actually figuring out their own franchisable models. And the sooner you get really good at that, the sooner you get good at starting to understand, I need to become a process-driven organization instead of throwing people resources at all the issues and struggles they run into, the faster you'll be able to grow your business. So thinking about SOP, starting to establish standard operating procedures, and then here's a key thing, is actually starting to identify a person or a couple of people in the business that have responsibility for creating and implementing standard operating procedures across the business is a really quick way to start to, or a good way to continue to grow your organization. And you know, I'll give you an example. I had a client of mine. It was about a $60 million firm run by two owners, and these guys had grown like crazy, and a very, very successful company. But they got to 60 million, and they had a barrier, and they just couldn't get past that barrier for about 3 years. And the biggest reason they couldn't get past the barrier really dealt with the owners, and the two owners had done not a great job of building out the org structure that would support what the organization looked like. And the way that they solved other problems, they're just throwing more people at it. And the other part of their issue was that they created an organization, there were no processes. And so what happened was every time somebody had a question, they had to come to one of the two owners to get an answer. Well, the problem with that is that those guys are working 20 hours a day, and they're the hardest working people that I know, but they couldn't work any harder than that. And so what happened is that their availability or lack of availability became an impediment to them being able to grow the business. And the reason for that is that they had no standard operating procedures. And so they wanted to be in the middle of every decision. They wanted to be in the middle of every deal. They wanted to be in the middle of every situation that happened with ordering product or whatever it might have been. And if they would have really focused on becoming more of a process-driven organization earlier and creating accountability for who own those processes and how you enable that with a system, then they would have continued to grow their business. Now, they figured that out in the last year where they put a chief operating officer in place, and that chief operating officer really took a lot of the responsibilities away from the co-owners that were really more sales-focused individuals. And this individual's actually built a really tremendous amount of operational progress in the business in the last 12 months, but it took a lot of bumping their head against the barrier to kind of figure that out. And then when you go to the remainder of the slide, you know, the things that you think about is you get really good at integrating systems and using them to produce all the data in the systems. Data becomes an important part of how do you start to make decisions. Analytics become a huge part of making decisions. We'll talk about the importance of that in the next barrier in a second. But then you start to see I need to start to integrate ERP systems, which are how does our whole business run on a single application, and how do we manage that change? How do we drive that change in the organization? That's an important part of it. And then we get to the Fortune 500 companies. It's, you know, multiple business units using technology, and how do we integrate that and across an enterprise, and how do we integrate disparate systems across an enterprise? That's all important stuff. It's hard work. And then the last thing in infrastructure that I think is super important, and I think it's really important in small, and really in all businesses, but I don't see enough focus on it in small and mid-sized companies, is change management. And so anytime you're changing anything in a business, it's impacting your ability to be efficient as a business. It's impacting your people. And so if you're changing how somebody does their job within a piece of technology, if you're changing how somebody gets paid, if you're changing how an interview process works, if you change reporting structure, any change that happens in the business, you got to really think about how you're going to communicate that to the organization. And you got to be really thoughtful about that. And I would tell you that as I look at business owners, one of the things that they have to continue to do a better job of doing is slowing down the decision-making process. Because what tends to happen is the ownership team and the leadership team and the management team are out in front of this stuff, and they spent time thinking about these things, and it all seems so clear and so easy for them. But the change is really the people embracing the change, and the people in your organization opening their arms to it, and the people really changing their behavior in order to drive organizational performance and organizational production. So getting really good at change management and the components of that and communication around that is a really important skill that you need to learn on infrastructure. Thanks, Dan. So the next barrier to growth is business focus, and you know, for me, what that means is really what kind of clients do we have? Where are we making money? Where are we driving revenue? And you know, really, what this slide talks about is that, you know, at the startup of an organization, all revenue is good revenue. You'll take all the revenue you can. You take all the customers that you can, and you know, hopefully you have great terms with them, and you're getting paid on time. Because I would tell you that the most important thing of any business is cash flow. You know, if you have revenue and clients, but you're not getting paid, those are huge issues. So cash flow is super important. But the assumption is, you know, I open the doors, and I'm starting to drive revenue and customers, and you know, I'll take everything I can in order to drive revenue and customers, and that's a super important part of it. But you know, really quickly, you have to start to think about gross margin and cash flow. And cash flow, again, I think is imperative. It's probably further up in the graph, more important because it's everything. But gross margin is really understanding: am I making money on a deal by deal basis or a service by service basis, and understanding what that really looks like. And you know, one of the things that we like to talk about really early, and organizations really, I think, have to get good at this after they get over the first barrier, is really understanding the three great sales lies, right? Which is every customer is not a great customer, every order is not a great order, and all gross margin isn't equal. And you know, as I go on to client after client and have these kind of conversations, you know, organizations they're not understanding, or they're not aligning their business around who are the best clients that we should be working with, that we make the most amount of margin on. And so what we like to really think about, and I like to see this happen as fast as you possibly can, but it's got to be no later, I think, than that kind of second barrier, is really starting to understand contribution margin. And so contribution margin, what that means is, what kind of profit am I making on a client by client basis or a service line basis when you add in all your overhead costs to support that client? And I've been through this myself. So I've had some really large clients. We drive a lot of revenue with those clients. But if I look at after our gross margin, if we like to look at all the other overhead costs that we have to support that client, it really becomes obvious that we're not making as much money on those clients as we thought, and they're very difficult to deal with, and we're not getting the kind of margin that we want. We're not getting the kind of cash flow terms that we want. And we look at, boy, those are the right kind of clients we have to have. So really starting to understand contribution margin early, as early as you can, is a super important part of it. Those things obviously become drivers of profit. So the better I get at understanding gross margin, the better I get at understanding contribution margin, and the better I get at controlling my costs, the more profit that I drive, right? And then when we talk about predictable profitability, you know, the thing I like to talk about in predictable profitability is this, and I don't know if we have anybody on the call that's part of a Fortune 500 company, or they're going to be part of a publicly traded company. But predictable profitability, the reason you see publicly traded companies get in trouble around predictable profitability is for two things. They miss earnings, or they miss revenue projections, they miss earnings. That's the two big reasons that they get in trouble. And while you may not want to be part of a publicly traded company, as a guy that's had business partners that own businesses and had banking relationships, I can tell you that my investors and my business partners, they always wanted to know, as predictably as we could predict it, what profit was going to look like and what revenue was going to look like and all those kind of things. And our banking relationships were the same, right? For us, the same covenant in our banking relationships. They really wanted to see what was our ability to drive profit predictably. And so that was a super important part of it. And the last thing when I talk about business focus is really, the better I get at understanding contribution margin, the better I get at really understanding what are the clients that I make the best return on. That really becomes an important part of really driving your go-to-market strategy and what your value prop is. And you know why that's important is what I see in a tremendous amount of businesses is an overdependence on a few key clients. And a lot, I see this frequently, where, you know, I see a $20 million client and they've got 10 million of their revenue running through one client, which, you know, can be great. It can be very lucrative for a while, but there's also tremendous risk in that. And, you know, really starting to understand who are the clients, are the right clients, why are they buying your services, what are they buying from you, what does it look like, and understanding how do you win. And then driving a sales strategy that allows you to go get more of those kind of clients, and managing and creating discipline around managing that sales process is super important. So you just can't work with everybody, and taking orders or services from everybody that wants to buy from you isn't a long-term strategy to driving organizational success. It will become an impediment for you. And what happens a lot of times, what I see is that businesses that have one kind of business development process aligned with one operational process. So think about it this way, that, you know, one client may value these kind of metrics. They may value speed and price. Others may value quality and value. And then I have an operational model that supports those, and I commingle my operational model. So I have one big operational organization that supports two different kind of clients and what they want. It creates a tremendous amount of inefficiency in your organization. So the better you do at really understanding who are the right kind of clients, why they buy from us. And quality isn't a reason that people buy unless you can demonstrate quality with real data, that when you get in front of a decision maker, the decision maker says, yeah, that's important to me. So really focusing on those things is an important part of driving business focus and overcoming these barriers. You can go to the next one, Dan. So the next barrier, and the most important barrier, is actually leadership. And leadership and culture, and we'll talk about culture in a second, are the most important things. So the better you get at leadership, the better you get at infrastructure, and the better you get at business focus. And the premise is the better my leadership team is, the better the people on the team are, the more cohesive this team works, the more efficient we are, the better we perform as an organization. So creating and maintaining a leadership team as an owner of a company, or as a leader in a company that's got direct reports, building that team is the most important thing that you can spend your time on. And here's the reality of it: you're never done doing it. You're just never done with building that team and its capability. You're always focused on that. And what this slide really talks about is that if you think about startup, and I launch an organization in my basement or wherever it's at, and I grow up to 10 full-time equivalents, kind of at that point everybody's kind of doing everything. There's no processes. It's kind of organized chaos. The owner's probably doing sales, and they're doing delivery, and they're doing bookkeeping and billing and collections. They're doing all those things. And what starts to happen is that they start to realize around 10 full-time equivalents that I need to start to put some structure in place because I'm going crazy, or I hope they do. That they need to really start to realize that as I move to the right, as I get to the second barrier, I need to start to delegate some stuff. I need to start to create some titles in the organization. I need to start to think about what are the new roles in the organization that are important to start to think about. How do I start to give some other people some areas of responsibility, because I can't do it all myself. And one of the things I'd like to talk about here, and this is really important, I think, between the first and second barrier, is really starting to think about what your organizational structure needs to look like. And one of the things I think is really super important is aligning your strategic plan with your organizational structure. So if you want to be a $15 million company in 3 years, you want to be a $5 million company or $50 million company, you have to really understand what that's going to look like. But you also have to understand, what does the organizational structure need to look like to support that strategic plan. And one of the things that I see consistently is organizations not spending enough time really building their organizational structure out. And the analogy I like to use is this: if you want to build a house, you wouldn't put a shovel in the ground to do anything when building a house until you had a complete plan, or architectural design, a blueprint of everything that was going to occur in that house. What the design of the house was going to look like, what the colors were going to look like, what the facade was going to look like, the landscaping, you have the detailed design around electrical, mechanical, how many bedrooms, all that stuff. You can spend all that time figuring out what your house is going to look like. But owner after owner of the businesses that I talk to aren't taking the same approach when they're thinking about, how do I really realize the vision of what my business is going to look like, by building a blueprint for what their organization needs to look like from an organizational structure perspective. And I think it's super important to really think about, if you want to continue to grow your business, what's the structure need to look like? As the owner of the company, I think one of the things that's really important to start to understand, if we're going to grow, I need to understand that, what am I really best at? What value do I deliver to the organization? What are the 5 things that I should be spending my time on? And then how do I start to create other roles in the business to start to support that? That is a super important part of what that looks like, right? And as I start to add people into the business, as I start to delegate, as I start to add new people into the business, the decisions then become all right, as I work on my org chart, then what kind of people do we add into the business? So if I need to build additional sales capability or operational capability or finance, whatever it is, what's my strategy on those? Do I go find people that have been there and done that? Do I bring those resources into the organization, or do I grow that internally within my own organization? And there's pluses and minuses to both of those. You know, if I'm bringing people from the outside, sometimes they're expensive. Can I afford that between the first and second barrier, or the second and third barrier? Can I afford those kind of people resources? Are those people going to be a cultural fit? Are they, you know, they may have been successful in a different environment, but are they going to be able to come and produce those kind of results in our environment? Are they going to be people that are going to work side by side with our teams and be part of the culture, fit within the culture, right? That's tough stuff. Those are the weighty decisions that you have to make. Or am I going to develop my own talent all internally, which is an alternative? But then the struggle with that is that's slow. And the other thing you run into is that you won't have all the skill sets in your business in order to realize the vision you want to get to. So how do you work through that stuff? And that's all part of organizational design for me. And then, you know, I think one of the things that's really important when you think about leadership here, especially at the first and second barrier, and actually the third one, I see this a lot, is how do you have a consistent process for developing internal talent? And, you know, I see that in bigger clients, and I've been in a lot of multi-billion-dollar kind of organizations, and they have a lot of structure around professional development for people in the organization. But in small and mid-sized businesses, which, you know, that's the driver in the American economy, there just isn't a lot of thought process around proactively how we developing the skill sets of our internal talent to be able to help us get our business to the next level. And how does that fit with our org structure that we've created, or a vision for what our org structure is going to look like? So, you know, it's really important to think about that. And as you look at, you know, the slide to the right part of the slide, you talk about, you know, growing middle management. So you're starting to put people underneath leaders in your business. That starts to happen around those barriers. And then you get to this kind of fully formed organizational structure. And I see that actually happen a lot sooner than 500 million. I have some clients that are a couple hundred million, and they've got fully formed organizational structures. And they have a real vision for where they're going to be. They're going to be moving from a $200 million organization to $500 million organization in the next 6 to 7 years. And so they spend a lot of time really thinking about what that structure needs to look like, and they're really focused on it. But really focusing on what the structure needs to look like to support your strategic vision is an important part of overcoming this barrier to growth here. Let's go to the next one, Dan. So, you know, this gives you an example of the complexity. We talk about leadership, and, you know, one of the things I'd like to talk about real quickly is, you know, how hard it gets. And you think about leadership and how important it is. And what this slide really shows is that as you add more people into your organization, everything just becomes more complex, and everything is harder to get alignment and clarity around everything that you do. And so thinking about what you do, how you do it, who's on the team, how do I have clarity around what's important in my role, what does success look like, all those kind of things. How do you manage change? How do we communicate with my people? How do we meet? All that kind of stuff is a really important part of really knocking down these difficulties that happen because of complexity and just having more people in the business. Let's go to the next one, Dan. So this is leadership and culture. And again, for me, leadership and culture is everything. My premise is that if you get leadership and culture right, you can be successful in any industry. It doesn't matter what business that you're in. It could be a manufacturing facility or packaging. It could be staffing. It could be anything. The better you get at leadership and the better you get at culture, the more successful you're going to be as a business, right? So it's getting the right people in your business and having a culture, a really defined culture that people know what it looks like, and you're protecting that culture all the time. And, you know, what you see in this slide here is that, you know, the culture of an organization at startup really emanates from the owner or owners. And, you know, it's kind of who they are, how they see the world, what their views of the world, and how they want to make that happen. And at startup, that's all great stuff. And as you start to grow and add people into the business, and you start to think about delegating, making sure that you're continuing to enable and keep that culture alive is super important, because when I start to lose some of that control from, you know, 10 full-time equivalents, so I know I have 15, 20, 30 people in the business, continuing to make sure that you're enabling that culture is super important part of it, because the larger that you get, the more locations that you have, the more geographies that you support, the more divisions that you support, the more leaders that you bring into the business, the more difficult it is to keep your culture alive. So being very thoughtful about creating culture and owning culture, I can't put enough focus on it. And one of the things that I think is most important to think about around this is that owners, CEOs, presidents, people that are running the business, or people running large functions in a business, they don't get to delegate culture. They own culture, and they're making sure that culture continues to happen in the business, right? So what this slide really talks about is that as the business grows, and as you put more structure in place, and you're managing people, and starting to delegate, then that's an important part of continuing to grow the business. And then what happens is they start to have managers that are in the business and multiple components of the business. And how do I delegate with a leader to managers? And then you get to the next one where you have leaders delegating to managers, and you're starting to create this organizational structure with the org chart that we talked about previously. But it's really around making sure that you have consistent alignment with who are we as an organization, where are we going, what are we really good at, what's our core focus, how do we integrate our core values into the fabric of the business, and starting to really focus on things like succession planning, role development. How do I create clarity around what's most important in a role? When do I add roles into the business? And again, how do we keep that culture alive and moving forward in our business? So let's talk about delegation. You can go to the next slide, Dan. So delegation is really interesting because when I ask people what are the reasons that they don't delegate and why it's so tough, these are the answers I typically get. I don't trust it'll get done properly. There's nobody to delegate to. It's easier to do it myself. I've always done this. It's part of my job. I see it a lot, and owners a lot. They don't want to give certain stuff up, and I want it done my way, which is all about control. But one of the things that we talked about earlier in the presentation is that we rarely see companies get past 75 FTEs if they can't delegate effectively. And so delegation is a skill that is a really important leadership skill to learn. And the struggle is, where do you learn about it at? So nobody really teaches you about delegation. You go to college, nobody teaches you in delegation. I didn't get my master's, but I have a lot of people that I know that have, and I ask them this question. Nobody taught them about delegation. So where do you learn about delegation at? And I think you learn about delegation at home. I think it's formative as a part of your life with your parents. And for me, that was command and control leadership. Take out the garbage, cut the grass, those kind of things. And I'm not sure that really works in today's business environment. So if delegation is super important and you get really good at it, then what does it look like? And so go to the next slide, Dan. So here's a quick little educational opportunity to learn about delegation, right? And hopefully this is something you can use today. These are the things that are really most important if you're going to be an effective delegator. And the opportunity to delegate happens in every one of my clients' business every single day. And I guarantee it happens in everybody that's on the call. It happens in their business every day. So what delegation, the four components are pinpoint, feedback, risk tolerance, and recognition. And the first is pinpoint. And so what that means is I'm going to delegate something to somebody. It isn't a reactive process. It's a proactive process. So I'm going to think about, all right, I want to delegate something. I just have too much on my plate, or this isn't something I should be spending my time on, or this isn't something I'm good at. I want to delegate to somebody. So I'm going to be thoughtful about delegating. So the first thing I do is I get really specific about pinpointing what does success look like. So I'm going to delegate this to Joe, and I call Joe in, and Joe, here's a conversation. Joe, here's what we need to get done. Here's exactly what success looks like to me. So I want to paint a picture in his head and my head of what success looks like. So I'm getting really specific about when we're done with this initiative, this project, wherever it is, when we cross the finish line, here's what success looks like. Now, the way that I make sure that Joe's aligned with me is I ask him the question, which is, hey, Joe, can you repeat back to me exactly what it is that we agreed upon? And why that's important is because I want to ensure that Joe's doing work on, or that he's spending time on stuff that's 100% of what I want versus spending time on something that's 50% of what I want. And so taking the time to slow down and make sure that that person has complete alignment around what it is that you've asked them to do is super important. And, you know, one of the things I've in my own personal career as a leader, I realized I was a horrible delegator. And the reason I was is that I took pride in getting things the first time. So when somebody told me to go do it, I just went and did it. And so that was how I actually delegated myself. Well, the problem is it's not really fair to people. So everybody picks things up differently. They have different perspectives. They learn differently. And so taking the time to ask for feedback around what did you hear from me? I want to make sure that I'm helping you to be successful. So feedback to me what it is that we agreed upon so that we're in complete alignment with that, right? The next thing is what's the feedback? So when do you want, you know, when do you want Joe to come back and provide you an update on what's going on? You know, that might be weekly, might be monthly, and depending on who Joe is and what he's done in the business, he may be somebody that needs to check in once a month or whatever the proper time frame is. Susie, who doesn't have a lot of experience, but you're trying to build leadership capability, maybe she's got to come in and see you once a week. So you're setting up and thinking about these feedback loops based on who the individual is, and you're creating trust with them because you're putting a feedback loop in place where they need to come in and see you. Next is risk tolerance. And so what that means is, what are the things, and again, this is why being proactive is important, but what are the things that I need to think about before I delegate? So maybe we're going to go over budget on something. So if we're going to go $3,000 over budget, come talk to me. I'd like to know about that. Or maybe key clients can be affected. Yep, I want to know about that. Or whatever it is, you're thinking about, all right, what are the things that when things go kind of outside of normal, I want to be made aware of that. What do I need to do? And then the last part is provide recognition. So we all need recognition. We all need different kinds of recognition, but really realizing the value that people are delivering. You've delegated effectively. They've gone and done a tremendous job for you. Make sure that you're providing the recognition that they need, because we all need it. And the last part of this, and this is a key thing around delegation, is the little blurb at the bottom is, you know, great leaders delegate results, not how to do it, right? So if you want to build organizational capability, you're helping people to find solutions to problems themselves, right? And here's one key thing. So hopefully you have an open door policy, and people are going to come into your office, they're going to ask you questions, right? And that's great. But if they want solutions to problems, your response to them is, your response back to them is, I don't know, what do you think, right? So people shouldn't be coming into your office and asking for you to make decisions around 1, 2, or 3 priorities, or 2 or 3 priorities, and have you make the decision. Your job is to put that back on them, because what they're really doing, there's upward delegating decision making, and you're not growing organizational capability, because what's happening in that scenario is you're becoming the impediment to organizational growth. It's pushing back on those people and them understanding that when they come to your office, it's okay to talk through the solutions, but come to my office with solutions. Your job is to ask clarifying questions so that they get to what's the right solution, what do we move forward with. Okay, Dan, go to the next one. So let's talk real quickly about what are the things you can do to overcome some of those barriers of growth that we talked about. So the first thing is strengthen your leadership team, right? So the number one most important thing that I see in my work with clients is, and where they don't perform, is really lack of alignment. It's everybody that's running the company being aligned around what's most important, and really buying into where we're going as an organization, right? So really getting aligned around that is super important. So having a vision of where you want to go as an organization, where are we going to go in 3 years? People want to be part of an organization as a clear vision where they're going. We work with clients, and all our work with clients is really in 3-year time frames. Nobody plans in 5-year increments anymore, because 5 years, things change so fast today, that's forever. So they think about 3-year time frame, where do we want to be as an organization? And then what are the things that we need to get done in the next year? We really spend time and like people to really focus on what are the things, the most important things that we need to focus on at the organizational level to help us achieve our 3-year goals and our 1-year goals. So oftentimes what I see is businesses are planning and thinking about things at the functional departmental level. And while that's not unimportant, it is, it's really most important to think about what are the things at the enterprise level that are most important. And then what are the 3 to 5 most important things that you should be focusing on and spending your time on. And really, to create alignment, everybody in the business has to agree that's in the room setting the strategic vision for the company. Everybody that's in the room has got to be aligned around, yeah, this is where we're going, and these are the most important things. And everybody's got to know what the number one is and be aligned to that. Everybody's got to walk out of the room. They got to communicate that to everybody in the organization that works with them or for them. And so we see the best organizations, the top performing organizations, they're taking a little bite of the apple by really focusing on where are we going in the next 3 years, where are we going in the next 12 months, how are the things that we're working in the next 12 months aligned to where our 3-year vision is, and then the things that we're doing in the next 90 days. So 90 days at a time, they're taking a little bite of the apple, and that little bite of the apple is aligning with what do we say we want to get done in the next 12 months and the next 3 years, right? And it's continuing to focus on that all the time. And then it's really focusing at the next level down around the department and individual. So habit number 1 is priorities. What are the most important things to get done in the business? Next is strengthening your leadership team is meeting, right? And lots of organizations don't like to meet. And I will tell you, I think it's one of the things that most organizations have a real opportunity to get better at. It's really getting structure around what do meetings look like. It's having a proper agenda. It's really having a meeting that's facilitated by somebody, not the CEO or the owner. Those create an unsafe environment, and you won't get the kind of really healthy dialogue that you need if the president or CEO or owner is the one facilitating all the meetings, because it becomes about their agenda versus maybe what's best for the organization. And what we like to see is organizations spending the time to take a couple days off site, an executive team or leadership team, really setting the plan for where's the organization going, 3 years, 1 year, what are the 90-day priorities, what are the core values, how are we integrating those into the company, that kind of work. How's that team really working together as a team? Then we like organizations to really focus on, all right, how do we have a quarterly rhythm? So we're coming back every 90 days and taking a deep look at what's happened in our business in the last 90 days. How did we perform? What successes did we have? What did we miss on? How do we, with the priorities that we set in the last 90 days, did we get those things done? If we didn't, why didn't we? And let's work through that. Then what are the things we need to get done in the next 90 days? So to continue this rhythm of discipline. That's really strategic work. Those annual and quarterly sessions are really strategic work. And then the tactical stuff that kind of pops up on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, we like to see that vetted out through monthly executive meeting. I'm spending a half day with the team really talking about what's happening in the business, what are the issues that are popping up, reviewing financial performance, those kind of things. And in a weekly meeting rhythm, which is I'm spending time, an hour, hour and a half as a team, really focusing on, again, what do we get right, what's working, what's not, what issues popped up. And why that's important is you're trying to get away from all the people running around or making phone calls in the middle of a day for something that could be covered once a week, right? So putting some more discipline around, all right, let's talk about issues as part of the team meeting versus running all over the business and individual one-on-ones all the time. And then how do you have a daily huddle, right? So daily huddle happens in lots of businesses, and it's really setting the tone for what's on my plate today, where am I stuck, when do I need help to remove things, but it's really around creating alignment and accountability to move the business forward. Let's go to the next one. And the last one is really being data driven. I talked about that earlier. And what that means is kind of 3 things that we think about. Standard corporate numbers, so having really good numbers on a monthly basis, quarterly basis around things like your profit and loss statement, your balance sheet, your accounts receivable, all those kind of things. Got to be really good at that stuff. They got to be right. But here's the thing, those are really real look numbers. I'm not going to change anything about those numbers at the end of January. They are what they are. But really going to the next data point, which is smart numbers, which is what's the 1 or 2 most important numbers in an organization. It could be your backlog. It could be the number of consultants you have on billing. It could be number of billable hours. It could be utilization rate, or some combination of those things, or number of widgets that you make, or gross margin per day, whatever it is. But what are those things that are most important? Because everything in the business needs to be aligned around that smart number. So at any time, you know where you're at. And I'll give you an example of that real quick. I was with a client today, and the chief operating officer was excited because he came in. He said, all right, our gross profit for today was $311,000 in gross profit today. They track their gross profit every single day. And so everybody knows where they're at and how they're performing. And then critical number is, it's something that happens that you have a special project. Maybe it's you want to hire a new leader, and you want to, for the next 6 months, you want to track, right, how many candidates have we had come in and interview for a role, and you want to have, I don't know, 10 candidates interview in the next 90 days. And so it's kind of thinking about it, looking at it from that perspective. Go to the next one, Dan. So to get towards wrapping up, it's not finance, it's strategy, it's technology, it's teamwork that's the ultimate competitive advantage because it's so powerful and so rare. And that's from Patrick Lencioni, my favorite business author. It's really about that. It's teams, it's getting people to work together, collectively together on the business, in the business and on the business that creates organizational success. If you get really good at that, you create organizational performance. Now, what should the leadership team spend their time on? One, we talked about this a little bit earlier, build and maintain a cohesive leadership team. That work is never done. It's always working on continuing to build your organizational capability and the people that are in the organization. And then thinking about what that looks like from an org structure perspective. The next is creating organizational clarity. And for me, that means things like, what's our ideal client? What do those ideal clients buy from us? What is my responsibilities in a role? Who do I go to when I need to ask for time off? What geographies do we support? It's all those things that happen all the time. And one of the things I like to talk about here to think about whether you have organizational clarity or not is go to everybody in the business that works with you or for you and ask them what are the two things that they do that get to create a paycheck. So they should have clarity around that. And if you have people that don't understand what are the two most important things that they do to create a paycheck, then you have an organizational clarity issue. And your job as a leader is to remove that issue. So that's an example of creating organizational clarity. The next is over-communicating organizational clarity. And here's the reality of it. It takes people up to 7 times to hear what you had to say. Now, me as somebody that takes pride in getting things the first time you tell me that, was a weakness for me from a communication perspective, because I thought, all right, I said it one time, we get it, it's great, we're good to go. But the reality is there's so much clutter out in the world today that's probably more than 7 times to create clarity. And actually thinking about creating organizational clarity, one of my clients is created in our new org structure. As the CEO realized that he wasn't a great communicator, all organizational communication now comes to the chief operating officer, who's just a better person at doing it, thinks about it, doesn't get frustrated when people don't get it. And so as a part of their org structure, they've created now a role, as a part of a role, that communicating organizational clarity is part of the COO job. And the last is reinforcing clarity through human systems. So how do I get paid? What are my incentive systems? What's our performance management system? What's our hiring process? All those kind of things, those are the things that are really important that need to be repetitive to help continue to drive organizational performance. Okay, Dan, you go to the next one. And so, building a visionary company, it's great to have a vision. I'm going to climb the mountain, but it's really around alignment. It's really getting clear on these kind of things and making sure that everybody in the business is completely clear on where we're going and where we go in there, and spending the time to make sure that they have clarity around that. As a next step, one of the things if you're interested in is we use a tool called the Execution Roadmap, which is our 2-page document for getting an organization strategic plan all boiled down to 2 pages. And part of what, if it makes sense to you, is spending some time on the phone, kind of walking through this document. How do you implement in your organization? Where's the first place to start? What kind of progress can you make? How do you integrate it into the business every day? Those kind of things. So as a next step, if you're interested in getting this document, this tool, and kind of talking about how to implement it, integrate it into your business, it'd be a great next step. Any questions? I know we're a little bit past my 45 minutes, but any questions anybody has?
So John, we did get a couple that came in during the presentation. The one was, what common thread do you see in the companies that you work with?
I think I talked about a little bit. They really realize that they're struggling with too many priorities and feeling unsuccessful at the end of the year, and frustrated at the enterprise level, organizational level. And they need help. They need really outside perspective to come in and really help them work through all that, and have somebody come in and ask really hard questions and work to get them aligned, because they just can't do it themselves. It's really consistent everywhere that I go.
Great. We did get a couple more. One is someone asked, is it more important to focus on your employees or your clients first?
That's interesting. So a lot of people tell you clients, I would tell you employees. So I was lucky enough to work at the Gallup organization for a couple of years. And one of the things that Gallup had was a Gallup Path. And the Gallup Path started with, you have to create a great management/leadership organization. So making sure you have the right leaders in place is the single most important thing, because they create the environment that creates a great employee work environment and drives employee engagement. And the higher you create, the better job you do of driving employee engagement, the better job you do of driving the client experience. So really focusing on how you're creating an environment where employees thrive, where they can achieve their personal goals. And as a leader, you need to know what their personal goals are. The better job you do at really understanding those things and helping to enable people to achieve those goals and helping them think about where they want to go with their career and doing it within your organization, the better your organization will succeed.
And we've got just a couple minutes, but there's maybe one more question. This is about delegation. So the question really is, what are some of the other skills that you think leaders should develop some expertise in?
Well, I talked about a little bit earlier. I think change management is just huge. And again, in small and mid-sized businesses, there's just nobody really talking about it, right? And it's really kind of thinking about the effect of change in the business, right? And there's this, when we do this session in front of a live group, there's a change management slide that we present, and it's got the change management curve, and it really shows the different phases that people go dealing with change, and everybody goes through this change management curve, and the role of a leader, because the key to business is getting really good at change. The better you're a leader is demonstrated through the change management curve getting narrow and not as deep. So it doesn't take as long to change, and there's not as many people that go to what we call the valley of despair. And so if you really want to grow your business, the better you can get it around change and understanding what that looks like and how to do it more efficiently and effectively across the business, the faster you grow.
Great. All right. Well, we are hitting 4 o'clock. So, John, thank you so much for your time. So again, John Ninkovich, CEO of Performix Group. Hope everybody got a lot of value out of the session. And thanks to everybody who attended today's focus on overcoming the barriers to growth.
Thanks.
Thank you.